5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to the EUVC Lowdown, the show wrapping up the week in European venture. I'm your host, Cathy White, and for a change today, we're starting with the headlines. Multiple later stage funds have announced promotions and appointments this week. Atomico has announced the promotion of principals Hilary Ball and Andreas Helbig to partner. Hilary will be investing in European and US-based consumer internet and enterprise companies as part of their growth team, whilst Andreas's expertise lies in B2B software with a strong focus on the Nordics and Baltics. Meanwhile, London, New York and Stockholm-based fund North Zone announced the appointment of Sanjot Mali, formerly of Tyborn Capital, again to lead growth stage deals. And Dan Chaplin has been promoted to partner at Dawn Capital and will co-head investments into fintech and digital assets alongside general partner Josh Bell. And in growth stage funding, London-based Highland Europe announced a whopping €1 billion fund this week. I will repeat that, €1 billion. Imagine I am making a little finger to my lip like a very famous movie. Its fifth fund will double down on Highland's existing strategy, backing high-growth European internet, mobile and software companies with over €10 million in annualized revenue. Spun off from Highland Capital Partners in 2012, the firm has backed file transfer service WeTransfer, meal replacement maker Huel, and the French analytics startup Content Square, valued at over $5 billion last year. Alongside this, it has promoted David Blyton to partner. Now that's a fair amount happening in the growth stages this week. I think we may have to take note of that. In other news, Brent Hoberman's Founders Factory said ciao to Italia this week, launching a new startup studio and accelerator with Swisscom-owned Fastweb to build, fund and scale more than 30 Italian and international digital businesses over the next 5 years. Our pal Dan Taylor over at TechEU reported that €2 billion of venture capital investment has flowed into the region in 2022. Italy is becoming increasingly positioned to compete with the more mature European markets. And I wrote this last night and I still want pasta. Bright Eye Ventures published the third edition of its European EdTech funding report this week, which reported that for the first time since 2014, venture capital funding to European EdTech startups saw a decline year over year, with startups raking in $1.8 billion in 2022 compared to $2.5 billion a year earlier. Globally, funding has declined to $9.1 billion from $20.1 billion. So we've more than halved the amount of investment that's gone into EdTech in the past year alone. Finally, as reported by TechCrunch this week, just days after announcing it cut 10,000 jobs, Microsoft announced it planned to extend its partnership with Chat GPT creator OpenAI in a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar investment. If you have news you'd love to highlight on the Lowdown, you can find me, Cathy White, on LinkedIn or on Twitter at CathyWhite10. We'd love to hear from you. This is a new segment that we will hopefully trial if David allows me to keep it.
I will think about it.
Now, I'd love to welcome our panel. Joining us on today's show, we have Francesco, Managing Partner of Silicon Roundabout Ventures, Elena, Investment Director at Flyer One VC, Borys, our good old friend Borys from SMOK Ventures, and David from the EUVC team. Francesco, Elena, it is your first time on the show, so I would love it if you could just do a quick introduction. Elena, let's start with you.
Thank you, Cathy. So my name is Elena. I'm investment director at Flyer One Ventures. Flyer One Ventures is an early stage venture capital firm investing across Europe mostly. We have a pretty large focus on CE founders, both like immigrant CE founders and founders that are actually in the CE right now. And also we invest in the UK and US startups sometimes. So our core focuses are consumer space, B2B SaaS and enterprise SaaS. And I've personally a generalistic member of the team, so I don't have any particular focus in terms of the industries, but at the same time I like such niches as the future of work, everything which is using AI to automate boring industries, and probably enterprise tech startups.
Awesome. I like that summary. I like AI that is changing boring industries. Excellent. I don't know PR for AI that is changing boring industries. Francesco, welcome. Tell us a little bit more about Silicon Roundabout Ventures.
Thank you, Cathy. So I am a computer scientist actually by background, and I launched just now VC Silicon Roundabout Ventures backing deep tech founders, especially in advanced computing and future of engineering that can have large global impact in sectors like climate or health or again, computing at core. And that's probably because of my background. I like working with scientists and engineers as a first check, literally acting like a super angel. And I got into all of this because alongside my career, I co-founded a tech community, which has now grown massively, Silicon Roundabout, which still meets, and it's still about engineers, scientists getting together. And then, of course, after that, also angels and other investors. So there you go. Started to write my first checks. They go bigger. Now I've got a fund to supersize them and bring other angels and LPs along with the journey.
Now, I think that we met a few months ago, and I mentioned at the time that the name of your fund reminds me, of the name of the community meetup that you do reminds me of the old school meetup that used to happen in London, which was Silicon Drinkabout. Which I miss. It's very different to talking about deep tech. It's just a lot of people in tech getting a bit pissed on a Friday night. Anyway,
I guess it's equally fun though.
There was actually some overlap. The Drinkabout guys and us, we were having at some point meetups in the same building, Google campus in London. They were downstairs, we were upstairs, different days. And there was a little bit of a magic moment of meetups in London with that Google campus space where a lot of engineers and founders used to get together and just meet up. Shut down, unfortunately. But you know, there you go.
No. It's a sad day, but I do know, and I'll ping you on this later, of some other spaces that are opening up in London that promise to do the same thing. So that's very interesting. But we're not here to talk about getting pissed and talking about tech. We're here to talk about tech, venture, deep tech, all of the things. We've given a massive hint to the first topic of the day, which is to jump into the report that came out this week. So Lakestar, Walden Catalyst and Dealroom released the European Deep Tech Report for 2023. According to Dealroom data, European investors put $17 billion into deep tech European startups last year. While that's down on 2021's record-breaking 22.8 billion, but let's all remember that 2021 was a year that we all went crazy, it's still significantly up from the 11.6 billion and 11.1 billion invested in 2019 and 2020. Last year, on the podcast, we looked into Atomico's State of European Tech Report when it came out back in December. And effectively, if you drew a line from where we were in 2019, 2020 to now, it's basically straight. We've returned to normal. But deep tech specifically is performing better. So Tim Smith at Sifted highlighted in an article that earlier this week as well, basically from the same data, probably got an early look at the report, the busiest deep tech investors. If you took out the mega rounds, the deals exceeding $250 million from the equation in 2022, we only actually saw a slight drop off from what was invested the year before in 2021. So it was still 14.9 billion, big numbers, which was still 3 billion up from 2020. Anyway, within this report, there were a few key takeaways, and we want to dive into some of this stuff today. So the first thing they've said in the report is deep tech in Europe has grown strongly. I would agree, the numbers look good, and has shown resilience in the recent market turmoil. Key emerging areas in deep tech have changed, which is very interesting. One of them I'm really interested in as well, actually, with more investment into novel energy, novel AI, future computing, and space tech. Space tech is the one I'm more interested in. And the report has also looked into the requirements to accelerate European deep tech further. So I want to start there with how do we accelerate it further? Francesco, I've chosen you for the big question. Because as you mentioned, you've been investing in this space for a while, super angel. How do we accelerate European deep tech?
Right. So I would say probably starting by stopping calling all of this generative AI stuff that people associate with deep tech, for example. If you look at my angel portfolio, that was like 2.5 years ago. And I think that, these days you really need to start to differentiate between low-level computing and what people started to call AI. I mean, literally yesterday, I was at the founders pitching presentation in London, and out of 6 finalists, every single one was an AI startup. Obviously, I would say. The issue there is that if now everybody's getting excited about Chat GPT. Oh, there we go. We mentioned it today. Pay attention to this. If you're in VC and tech, try to go the next, week, and try to have a day without seeing or saying Chat GPT or GPT-3. It's impossible. You're not going to be able to.
Impossible.
Right? So, and I think, that's something that I think it was in the report, the fact that deep tech is always changing. Deep tech used to be normal tech. Actually, at the very beginning of ventures, as professional venture investing, the first breakout companies like Fairchild Semiconductors in the US were hardware semiconductor companies, Intel, Apple even. And then it was only because of this infrastructure that was laid down that the whole internet bubble could explode. And now we're seeing the same. you look at transformers, which is the technology behind Chat GPT, and the paper came out but from Google Brain, I think, scientists back in 2017. I mean, we're like 5 years down the line, right? And it's not that OpenAI suddenly came out with a breakthrough. They've been working on this for a long time, and they just trained more and more data points until now, and they published the results publicly. So now people start to see the impact of this. But to me, deep tech was that 5 years ago or 4 years ago when the foundation was being laid out. So I think that right now AI still plays a part in it, but really most of what people consider AI today has moved into general tech, and the innovation will be the whatever algorithms will enable the next wave 5 years down the line. And so maybe right now there is a scientist, there is an engineer in Europe that has come up with a way to make AI more efficient or to create a new version of AI. Or, which is probably more exciting to me as an investor, there are people building chips to accelerate AI or making different type of computation possible at semiconductor level, whether it's CPU, GPU, or even completely different architectures. Then, of course, that leads into quantum, which is probably the biggest leap we can take as far as we know today in terms of computing. And then you've got the rest, the climate and the health, how much climate money has been spent claiming it was for climate good, and then really ending up in marketplaces for carbon credits. If we really want to make an impact in climate, we need to start to back batteries. We need to start to back this type of technologies. And I think finally started to be a shift. However, we really need to, at pre-seed seed, be more aggressive into pushing for the long run, not just for sort of a tech transfer 2.0, but really try to build unicorns. And finally, we started to see in Europe some examples like Northvolt. That's possible, to be more US minded, in more engineers, more scientists, more technical background type of people backing these people, being bolder. Because if you look at the US, they were years and miles behind us in fusion, and then sat there ahead. Like, how did that happen? Did it happen because when they stood and said their venture mega industry behind it, there was no stopping it. And so if we really want to do that, we've got to also ramp up our net.
It's interesting. There was one thing that you were talking about just then, and it made me think about it's a real bugbear of journalists. I'll explain this really quickly, right? But it's the startups that say that they have an AI that absolutely do not have an AI. It's, that we went through this period. I don't think we've necessarily left this period, but we definitely went through a period, right, where any startup doing anything that was automation of some form just whacked on AI and made it look sexy, but it wasn't actually an artificial intelligence of any form. Do you think we're moving into an area where this is going to happen now, but with the deep tech label? So people claiming deep tech to startups that they're building, but they're not actually, you wouldn't necessarily actually say that they are a deep tech company.
I don't know. I think that if they'd be fairly easy to spot, I mean, unless the investor is gullible.
For you, I think for others, there's people that maybe are dipping their toe into deep tech, but they're not deep tech experts necessarily by any means. Borys, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's great. Like, I would love them to be open about that and openly lying, because this is why I kind of know that this founder is already, either not technical enough to invest in them, or they just basically kind of disclose that they just want to fool me. So, like, I think for all investors that are, have a technical background, or at least do some basic due diligence on the technical side, it's going to be fairly easy to spot whether, they are a prompt company or they are an actual AI company. When you start asking about data, for example, that's where the first kind of cloud of doubt will, show up if they say, we import all the data from external system versus they have their own data. So I would say it's going to be a lot of that, because when there was a Web3, number of startups, claiming to be Web3, there's going to be a number of startups claiming to be AI. I think the smart investors just need to, understand what they're investing in. I think that's as simple as that.
There was a little nod there, wasn't there? The smart investors. David?
I started in a subsector of the deep tech, when I joined the venture industry, so in life sciences, biotech, mostly drug dev. So I think this is super interesting topic, and I love it. And I think, like, Francesco hinted to something that the report that we kind of started off by talking about also talks about, which is, understanding deep tech. What the fuck is deep tech, right? Everyone's talking about deep tech. And if you talk with Jane from Fund X, she will have a definition. And then if you talk with Mark from Fund Y, completely different definition, right? And I think, like, it's a really tough conversation to have, right? And the Chat GPT conversation, just to mention it again, comes also out of that, right? But I think I really like what the report does, in the sense of really kind of highlighting, It's typically because it's ideas with a higher technological risk, oftentimes more capex intensive. But on the flip side, competition and or market risk might be much lower, right? But that just means these are deep technological breakthroughs that require expert knowledge, right? They require insights, they require scientists, they require researchers, right? And I think that is where, if we want to accelerate deep tech, that's what we have to think about, right? And again, the report talks about it, how to unlock that potential out of universities. And, I've had the pleasure of talking with many funds doing it really well, right? Some traditional biotech model, right? You partner directly with the universities, you partner directly with the TTOs, you have agreements in place. IQ Capital out of the UK is doing more or less that model. Creator Fund, completely different model, right? Partnering directly with super bright PhD students and not directly with the universities. And again, finding different ways to tap into that by building these networks. So I think we have really interesting case studies in Europe already. So it's about just kind of supercharging that. But I think at the end of the day, the challenge is the same as for every other sector, right? Because this is about pre-seed investing, right? It's not necessarily about the follow, it's about the first ticket, right? And that is typically a new generation of GP. And that new generation of GP, and Francesco, you can share a bit your experience as well, right? It is extremely hard to find LPs that say, yes, deep tech is exciting. And by the way, we also do a first-time fund. Like that, every LP says, yes, deep tech super exciting. Did you back a first-time fund? No. Well, it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, right?
Yeah, I think that if we talk about the definition of deep tech, for example, we do not invest in deep tech, and deep tech is something that we do not entirely understand because we do not have expertise in some particular science, and we know the numbers and maybe we know the market, but we cannot tell if a technology is made well, and if it's not, and if it's perfect or not, and how competitive it is. In terms of AI, I think that it's becoming more generic probably at the moment, given that everyone has some kind of access to AI at the moment, and just building a product or an app based on Chat GPT or whatever, this is not deep tech anymore. So I think that maybe probably founders and maybe some of the VCs need to kind of stop fooling themselves, hire maybe somebody with deep scientific background, and invest into something that is way harder than just yet another mental health app with a Chat GPT application.
Thanks for that, Elena. I think I've got one more question on this. I just want to expand a little bit more about what David was talking then about, unlocking the potential in academia. This is something that is dived into within the context of the report. Francesco, you're a computer scientist by background and everything. What do we do? What do we do to get more European talent coming out of universities with amazing ideas that we can jump on and flow all of our money at?
I think we're already doing it in a way, in the sense that, look, at the end of the day, David touched upon a big issue, which is how does capital flow into the ecosystem? And that is, to me, related to another issue in tech, which is diversity. Because to me, the fact that, there is lack of shared backgrounds between us, the VCs that turns out we're middlemen actually, and the LPs, impacts all the weirdos, right? Because if you're a female or if you're Black, you don't fit that sort of criteria. And if you're a mechanical engineer or a physicist or a computer scientist, you also in a way don't fit that background for different reasons altogether. And so that is a fact. Now, with trying to bring people out of universities, I think the fact, what we are doing is that there are some examples, and that's happening. So despite all of the issues, you start to have models where you have technical founders stepping up and achieving success. That started in the US. Now we're also seeing it in Europe. We've got the Graph Course, the Norfolds. We've got examples. The more examples we have, the more people will look at them. So again, with the more female founders become unicorn founders, the more people will look at that as a role model, saying, for computer scientists, engineers, mechanical engineers, and physicists. So if that continues, it's going to have a positive effect. So that's number one. Number two, universities need to step up their games, because there have been a bunch of reports about how terrible universities are in Europe. Now that's started to change. But again, every time I speak to a university that has not had many venture spinouts and instead relied on tech transfer offices, the whole mentality is different. And that has an impact also on the investors that invest in those companies, because you see things like terrible terms offered to the company, looking at that sort of short-sighted, hey, effectively this is an R&D IP game that some corporate would buy for a few tens of millions. And whilst that is technically, I guess, deep tech by definition for the type of tech, It's not going to create deep tech startups that can end up becoming giants and achieve a big impact, because they're going to be acquired and that's it. That's pretty much the end. I think that's major. And then the second point, inspiration, and that's in a way happening. We need to sort of push further. Second point, the universities need to have better terms. But the third point is that we should not look at just universities. I'm looking at now, my next investment is not going to be a university spin-out. The one after is not going to be a university spin-out. They're company spin-outs. And right now, I think we're in a golden moment where, because of the downturn, loads of companies, from traditional dinosaurs in engineering to tech companies like Google, they're axing or downsizing their moonshot R&D projects, which means that a lot of people are getting pissed off about their babies not seeing the light of the sun, and so they get out. And it's what used to be a stream is becoming literally a massive flood, and I think that's only going to increase for the next few years. So I would say all of what I said about universities to make it better, plus let's not just look at universities. There are already some good funds doing some great work with unis, and I'd like to go invest with them. But I think that one area which is still underserved in Europe is creating communities for people in the corporate world that want to get out of the corporate world to go and launch companies. Like Lilium, for example, in Germany. The founders were not, necessarily just a university spin-out, and I think we need more of those.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you very much, Francesco. Now, there are a couple of words that you mentioned in that, which nicely segue onto our second topic of the day. You talked about diversity, which brings me on to my personal rant, followed by my questions to all of you guys. So this week, again, in Sifted, Kai Nicole Schwartz put together an article which interviewed 6 different female founders, all sharing their experiences of fundraising whilst they are pregnant. Now, anecdotally, over the years working in the London tech scene primarily, but across Europe, I've spent a lot of time talking to female founders, just women in tech in general. We have lots of complaints, obviously. There's lots of things that we would like to improve. But on a more personal note, I did share on LinkedIn earlier this week that genuinely I'm terrified about having a baby. And one of the reasons I'm terrified about maybe having a baby, I'm still kind of on the fence, that's another matter. But one of the reasons that I am scared is there's so much bad stuff that you hear happening to women who are in leadership positions or rising through the ranks or are the founder of a company, and the minute that they're pregnant, their identity shifts amongst those around them, and you hear lots and lots of crap stuff, right? So I'm worried as a business owner that will impact me, and maybe my fear is completely unfounded, but I think it comes from a lot of facts. And this is what I want to dive into today. So within this article, the women involved, all amazing women, by the way, they share the good, the bad, and the ugly. Bad examples are getting so far down the line with a VC in negotiation, looking at term sheets, and then the VC finds out that they're pregnant. And then for some reason, they've come up with some really bullshit reason to completely drop out of the deal. There's lots of really bad examples like this. There's some other great examples where VCs are totally accommodating, everything works out fine. But at the end of the day, you're talking about an incredibly emotional time, an incredibly physically difficult time. You are literally growing a human and growing a startup. But what I want to talk about today, really, and Elena, this is why you and I connected on social media as well to talk about this, is, ultimately, I don't want to go into the why this is a problem. I want to go into the how we fix this. What do we have to do to change it? So, Elena, what are your thoughts? I know you've seen the Sifted article. What did you take away from it?
Of course, there is still a big problem with female founders in venture capital, regardless of the region where they are based. So it's still a very small amount of money flows into female founder startups, and I don't think probably it's a huge problem with being pregnant. I think that the problem overall is that VC industry is flooded by male GPs, male investment directors, principals, venture partners, and women sometimes are not discriminated in person. They just can't get into their circles, into their meetings, into their vacations together. For example, if you have a completely male team and they've decided to go to ski somewhere in the mountains, and you're the only female, usually feel like you can't go with them because you're the only female, and what will you do there? So I think that this is one of the problems, and I think that the solution is in the question itself. So it means that we need to have more female VCs, to have more female funded and founded startups which are successful at the moment. So this is like just my take, my from my experience, because I usually feel kind of pressured when somebody, like when my male colleagues, for example, decide to go to some, I don't know, offsite together, and I feel like I can't go with them because it would feel strange. And if it's not a family, I mean vacation together.
Yeah, I got you. Boris, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with the female VCs. Although sometimes it's weird because I'm a father. Diana, my co-founder, she's not a mother, so it should be me having more empathy towards female founders who have a baby, because I had a baby. So I would say it's about empathy in general. It's not about the gender you hold. And I think in general, openness is good. That's what I'm the whole my business I do saying openly things to people, and I expect people to be open. So I think I would expect that to be disclosed, that someone is pregnant, but it's not for the reasons you think. I think the worst case that you can expect if you share that is you just spot an asshole. You wouldn't work with that person anyway, like an asshole VC who passes because he hears that. I heard so many stories, like really horrible stories. For example, my friend Agnieszka from The Village, Polish serial entrepreneur, she had an exit in her previous startup. She's a mother, and she received a lot of discriminative feedback from fundraising for her second business. Just for being a mother, she gets questions like, how are you gonna share being a mother and having a startup? Are we talking pregnancy? So I think like my final kind of thought, fundraising while pregnant is definitely harder. I think it's like fundraising while at war, and a lot of Ukrainian startups do that, and we fund them anyway. I think if you decide to do so in spite of all the odds, it says plenty about you as a person. I would say this actually means that you want this badly. So I think that would be a positive sign to me, not a negative sign. But I think openness is really important about everything. Also about that.
I think, Boris, we put you in the good, shiny, great example of VCs who give a crap about other people, which is wonderful. But, within this article, there's an example from one of the founders. She actually says, I would not tell people I was pregnant. If they asked me if I was pregnant, they would answer the question and they would give them the real answer. So there's sort of, I guess, from a wider ecosystem point of view, there's this pressure felt for quite a few people to hide it. And it's one of the other things you were talking about then with the successful founder who's gone back out to fundraise and is pregnant and everything. I've heard countless stories from female founders who specifically find a male co-founder to navigate through this period. And I'd love to know how many VCs, maybe I'm being very, very judgmental right now, but I'd love to know how many VCs, when they meet a male founder and there's no woman in the room, asks them if they have kids, or if they're planning to have kids.
I think nobody. I genuinely think that nobody. Like this is a very maybe painful question, because I just realized that this question is never asked when there are only male founders present on the call. And but for example, I've never asked any woman also if she's planning to have kids, and if she's pregnant or something, because I never even thought about that. So I think that if you're a founder and you're pregnant and you are motivated, you will do anything that's possible to be successful, in both fronts. It's I don't know why it's even a problem. And we have, I think, like I've counted yesterday, out of 15 deals that I led, actually 5 of them are founded by females, or co-founded by females. And I never thought even about like having any problems with them because of the kids, because of some other responsibilities, because we all have life responsibilities. So I don't think that it's a huge problem, but this problem can be on the market. And I feel that somehow I can appear in a similar situation somewhere in the future, and that's why I don't want to like discriminate anyone at the moment, because I can be at their place at some point in my life.
You shouldn't want to discriminate anyone at any moment, but I get what you're saying, right? And I think actually, quite frankly, Elena, the numbers that you've shared, the number of female co-founders that sit within your portfolio is significantly above the vast majority. David,
I'm going to go on a bit of a rant that will sound as like completely not related, but then I'll kind of connect it in the end, right? This made me think, like the second we started talking about this, I remembered an article that I think it was Frontline's former head of platform, Carolina, wrote back in 2019, right? And it wasn't about this topic. It was about the topic of maternity and paternity leave inside of VC firms. and where she basically shared, and I'm speaking out of top of my head, so I might be saying some stuff wrong, but she basically shared that, you know, when she joined Frontline, she didn't really think about paternity leave and maternity leave rules and policies, and then when she basically got pregnant or decided that she wanted to get pregnant, she basically went and read like the, you know, the regulation, the legislation for the UK, and she was like super scared because it was like terrible, right? And then off the back of that, she interviewed, I think it was 20 or so VC firms in the US and UK, and comes up with a bunch of topics that you as an investor should think about if you want to be a mom or a dad, right? And so I think this all comes back to what Borys is saying, right? It's about empathy, right? Because every single person will hopefully, you know, go through the challenges if they decide to have a kid, right? It is really tough, right? It is really tough whether you are a mom or a dad, right? And we personally, with the GPs that we end up investing with, I actually know how many kids they have and I know their age, right? But it's not because I'm asking, right? I'm not asking, are you pregnant? Are you planning on having kids? That's not why. It's because in the relationship, I'm focused on getting to know the investor. And I think that VC, like, the reason why we like this next generation of GPs is because they're much more relational and much less transactional. And that leads to empathy, right? So I don't have a lot kind of to share in terms of views, but I think I really agree with Borys here. It's about that empathy and getting to know the individual. And yes, you are a VC. You have to see 1,000 deals to invest in 1%. Everyone says that. Half of the times it's not really true. Anyway, you have to see a lot of people, but you should get to know the founders, right? You should get to know, do they have the grit? How do you assess for grit? You can't assess for grit without knowing someone, right? So I think it's actually bad business, in my opinion. And my heart goes out to every female founder that has gone through it. The only thing I'd add, I have seen many female founders not hire other female operators because they're pregnant. So I think empathy goes both ways, right? So I think, you know, we really have to be skeptic about ourselves and put ourselves up against those standards every single time we talk about this, because the same goes for people who are from minorities, people who struggle with certain pathologies, as an example, right? Autoimmune disorders. And I know of a lot of terrible stories, right, in the venture world. So I think it's all about empathy and all about getting to know the people and really build relationships with the people.
It's just really quickly, and then and Francesco, I'll bring you in after this. Just on that note, years ago, and I'm talking years ago, I did hear a very well-known female founder in London complain, like openly at an event, that most of her senior team that she had hired were women, and she would not do it again because they all had their babies at the same time. And I remember hearing that when I was probably, Elena, about your age, because I know you're much younger than me, but I remember hearing that at your age, and in my head I'm just like, fuck, right? Because you reach a point as a woman where on average now most women are having babies by about 31, and I'm 34, so I'm already over the heat. That's terrifying. And what's annoying is, I think, you know, with all of these things, and I said this in the LinkedIn post that I put up, it feels like we take an incremental step forward and then we all come crashing back to what we knew before, or even worse. And women, I think, are great in, when they're not this person, in being willing to change things and build the stuff that they want, that they wanted in order to better things longer term. But yeah, it's seeing things like that have just got into my head like 10 years later, and it's still lurking. Francesco.
My first SPV, so, you know, from sort of transitioning from just me, Angel, then SPV, and before the fund, was actually into a founder that I had met in the community. She had come to our meetup some time ago, and before she went out fundraising, about some months before, she had come to meet me for, you know, some mentoring ideas when she was pregnant. And to me, that day, I pretty much decided I was going to invest, because if somebody's got the grit, it's also fitting my thesis, to like go out there and build a company when they're pregnant. I was like, Jesus, you know, I just want to be behind you, you know what I mean? It's just great, right? So that's going back to what Borys said. It should be a testament. So then you say, how do we fix the problem? Because, you know, okay, maybe there is no problem, there is clearly a problem. I think the problem comes from the clashing of cultures. And what I mean is that same investment, when it came out to actually doing it, I was sort of, you know, it was talking to people about it before making the final decision. And I spoke to somebody in investment banking. Now, I'm not necessarily to criticize investment bankers in general, but that person, without any bad intention, but it's a great person, sort of raised the flag of, you know, would she be able to run a company, you know, like if she's pregnant, whatever, which probably relates to what you just heard. Now, you just said now, Cathy, about, you know, even a female founder being, you know, wary about it. And I think that that's the problem. If the majority, goes back to what Elena said, if the majority of the investment world comes from an environment where, whether they're female or male, there are very few female, but even those female that come through that culture have been brainwashed sort of believe that there's only one way to show grit and resilience, which is work day and night until 12 at midnight in the office because you've been a management consultant, and that's things in management consultants have to be done, or investment banking. And the whole 90% of the industry is like that. They just mirror their expectation of what hard working is. If you step outside, then maybe you realize that grit can actually be someone who is pregnant, embraces being pregnant and being a mother, but also has got the capacity to go out there and ask for mentoring and building a company. And yes, of course, that person took 2 or 3 months off and had a great co-founder to step up against it. But even that was sort of like, hey, I know I need to surround myself with people that will be able to support me if I also want to be a mother. And that was something that, someone smart that knows about this type of things. So, and it could be the other way around, right? Like paternity leave. Why are people, male not supposed to take time off if they want to, be a father? And I know a great founder in our community that did that last year, and the company had a team by a point, had raised money, and he could afford it. So I think, again, how do we fix it? Let's just bring more different views about culture and how we demonstrate grit and resilience and entrepreneurship, and let's make this a topic that we can debate. Because to me personally, like Borys, being pregnant and going out and building a company is actually a way to demonstrate that entrepreneurial drive. That means you will do whatever it takes to make things happen the way you want it to happen, whether it's you want to have a family even though you're an entrepreneur, or whether it's you want to build a company and make it succeed even if you have a family. That is what we should be looking for, right? As investors or founders, we look for that drive.
I just realized that I basically heard many times in my career from very different people, both male and female, that I need to make sacrifices, and that finance is not actually for me, because I'll need to, at some point I'll need to make a sacrifice and choose between a family and a job, and some male would surpass me in any other career. And this is scary. I mean, this is like, these people were really bad.
I think there's an element within all of this as well, aside from culture. It's definitely embedded in culture, but there's a generational thing at play here as well, right? Like, I mean, Elena, I didn't have a corporate background, but I did get told by my father when I was in my early 20s that I am a princess and I need to marry well, and there will be a period of time where I might not be working and my husband will need to provide for me. I love my father dearly, but I would like to say that I earn a lot more money than my husband, and he will be very well looked after because he is the prince that he is. It's a generational thing. We are women, we will have babies, we're built to do it. There's the maternal instinct that kicks in, and society still sees us as the caregivers and the looker afters, and we praise men when they do it and we criticize women if they don't do it well, and it's all got to change. I think the empathy note that everyone has shared here is really important, and my challenge to every listener, particularly our male listeners, if you feel the same way, share that sifted article with these 6 female founders and share that you think that this shows grit. This shows resilience. This is a testament to that individual and what they're doing, because I think women need to see it more, particularly to inspire and help those female founders. On that note, that is all we have time for this week. Make sure to check out the EUVC newsletter over on EUVC and follow the European VC on LinkedIn, where we will continue the conversation. And if you want to get involved in the podcast, we are eager to add more voices to the Lowdown community. So do feel free to get in touch. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'll be the woman ranting about something. And until next week, thank you all very much.